Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive with Bookgist, our exploration of fascinating books from all sorts of genres. And remember, you can always find the full summaries at bookgist.net. This time, we're going to be cracking open Melania by Melania Trump. I don't know about you, but I'm really curious to get beyond the headlines and just see what she has to say in her own words about her journey from a small town in Slovenia to the White House.
It's quite a journey with some really fascinating twists and turns, and the book really does offer a perspective we don't often get, a glimpse into the woman behind the very carefully crafted public image.
Right, and I think we've all seen countless articles and interviews about her, but this book gives us something different. It takes us all the way back to her childhood. In Sevnica, a small town in what was then Yugoslavia, we even learned about her parents. Her dad worked his way up to become a car salesman, and her mom had this creative flair working in the textile industry.
And this is interesting because Melania kind of pushes back on that common perception of this bleak communist upbringing. Yugoslavia, especially Slovenia, where she lived, practiced this system called socialist self-management. It was still communist, but Slovenia was relatively well off. Melania even mentions family vacations, just as Croatia's Dalmatian coast, which, definitely broadened her horizons.
Yeah, it does paint this much more nuanced picture of her early life. And it really seems like those early travel experiences, combined with, her strong family values and her emphasis on hard work, really shaped her.
Absolutely. Those values come through very clearly in the book. But it also shows how she had to adapt those values to navigate very different worlds, from, high fashion to the White House, speaking of which. She initially set her sights on architecture. Remember, her mom worked in textiles, while Melania was drawn to design, and even enrolled in a design and photography school.
But then talk about a sliding doors moment. She gets discovered by a photographer named Stane Jerko. He was a big name in Slovenia at the time. So you can imagine for a young Melania, this wasn't just any photo shoot. This was a chance to work with someone who could really launch her career.
And that chance encounter led her to participate in the Look of the Year contest and eventually move to Milan to pursue modeling full-time. Can you imagine the resilience it took to move to a new country, learn a new language, and break into that really competitive fashion world?
It really is a testament to her adaptability. And you see this incredible thread of reinvention throughout her life. Each stage has its own demands. And she seems to meet them head on. And it's interesting to consider the broader context here.
Yeah.
She was part of this wave of Eastern European models who found success in the West after the fall of the Iron Curtain.
It really was a cultural shift happening on this larger scale. And as Melania's modeling career is taking off, she eventually finds herself in New York City during Fashion Week. And that's where she meets Donald Trump.
This part surprised me, honestly. I didn't realize how independent Melania was in that initial encounter. She wasn't easily swayed by Trump's advances, and even took his number instead of giving him hers.
Yeah, you can see her independent spirit right from the start.
Definitely. The book talks about how they connected over some shared interests, like Elvis Presley and attending sporting events and theater. But their relationship was thrust into the spotlight in a pretty big way when they appeared on the Howard Stern show in 1999.
That reserved demeanor she's known for was often interpreted as aloofness by critics, and the book offers kind of her side of that, like how she was protecting herself. But it also raises some interesting questions about public perception. It must have been such a whirlwind experience.
I can only imagine doing that Howard Stern interview. I bet even someone as poised as Melania felt a bit out of her element there. So now let's fast forward a bit. We get to the point where Donald Trump decides to run for president. Melania really gives us some behind-the-scenes insights into their decision-making as a couple. And remember, if you want even more details about all of this, you can always check out the full summary on bookgist.net.
Always a good reminder. It's important to understand that Trump had been talking about politics for years. Even back in the 80s, he was very vocal about trade imbalances and foreign policy, criticizing countries like Japan.
Exactly. He had this outsider status even back then, and the strong belief that his base would be the working class, which turned out to be pretty accurate.
It is fascinating to see how Trump's background and those early pronouncements on these issues really laid the groundwork for his political identity. And, when he formally announced his candidacy in 2015, that iconic image of him and Melania coming down the Trump Tower escalator, it was a major turning point.
Oh, absolutely. Melania even talks about how aware they both were of the impact this would have on their family, especially with their son Barron. But she was supportive. and believed in his vision.
Trump's campaign, as we all know, was unlike anything we'd really seen before. He really tapped into this voter dissatisfaction, especially around things like immigration and trade. And, his media presence was just explosive.
His outsider status and those provocative tactics really amplified his appeal. And those populist messages like building a wall really resonated with voters who felt ignored by the establishment. But let's talk about Melania's role in all of this. What did she focus on as First Lady?
Well, she launched the Be Best initiative, which was all about promoting children's well-being, addressing issues like bullying and online safety, things that were clearly important to her. Yeah, it's interesting how she chose to focus on those areas, especially given the tumultuous political climate surrounding the Trump presidency. The book doesn't shy away from that constant polarization, that feeling that even everyday issues became battlegrounds.
And yet she seemed to deliberately choose this path focused on positive action. Even after leaving the White House, she continued this work with children by launching the Fostering the Future initiative.
Exactly. And that initiative focuses on helping foster children gain skills for stable employment and financial independence. It really reflects that thread of self-reliance that we see throughout Melania's life and that she really emphasizes in the book.
It is fascinating how these initiatives connect back to her own experiences and the values she holds dear. Now let's talk about one of the key themes that runs throughout the book, authenticity.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Melania constantly emphasizes the importance of staying true to yourself, regardless of what the world throws at you. And she's not just talking about internal values, she also focuses on the significance of loyalty, faith, and self-reliance.
It's like she's woven those values into the fabric of her life. From her childhood in Slovenia to her time in the White House, they're evident in her dedication to family, her commitment to her husband's vision, and her work with children through Be Best and Fostering the Future.
For readers looking for a deeper dive into these aspects of Melania's life and how they inform her perspective, the full summary on Bookgist.net is a great resource. It unpacks those details in a way we just don't have time for here.
That's a great point. Bookgist.net is such a fantastic resource for getting the gist of a book quickly, whether you want more detail before diving into the full text or just a refresher on the key points. And speaking of staying true to oneself, Melania's fierce protectiveness of her family, especially her son Barron, really comes across in the book. She talks about the lengths they went to shield him from the intense media scrutiny and the challenges of growing up in such a public and often chaotic environment.
That really resonated with me. It's a reminder that these are real people with real families, and the impact of fame and political power can be really profound. We see the headlines, we see the sound bites, we see the carefully crafted images, but we rarely get a glimpse into their private lives and the personal sacrifices they make.
And that's what makes Melania so compelling. It offers a more nuanced and humanizing perspective, allowing us to connect with the person behind the public persona.
Absolutely. We get to understand her motivations, her struggles, and her triumphs on a much deeper level. And for Melania, one of those struggles was undoubtedly facing the intense scrutiny and often harsh criticism that came with being First Lady.
Yeah, and she definitely doesn't shy away from addressing that in the book. In fact, she even talks about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in 2024. Can you imagine the fear and anxiety she must have felt?
It's a stark reminder that even in the midst of political power, there's still a family dealing with very real and very scary situations. She talks about the impact on their son, Barron, and her own feelings of vulnerability.
And she's quite critical of the political climate at the time. She felt that the rhetoric from some Democrats in the media contributed to this really dangerous atmosphere.
It's clear that the experience deeply affected her. She even included an open letter to the American people at the end of the book, calling for unity and healing.
It's a powerful message. And it shows a side of Melania we don't often see in the media. This memoir isn't just a rehashing of headlines or response to critics. It's a deeply personal reflection on her life, her values, and her experiences.
And she chose to share it on her own terms, in her own voice. That makes it all the more powerful and refreshing. She's not trying to please everyone or fit into a particular mold. She's simply sharing her truth.
It really is. And, Melania really reminds us that even the most public figures have these private lives and personal struggles and these unique perspectives that didn't really deserve to be heard. And sometimes those stories can surprise us and challenge our assumptions and even inspire us.
Absolutely. It really humanizes someone who has often been, just reduced to headlines and sound bites.
Yeah.
It allows us to see her as a multidimensional individual who's navigated this really extraordinary life.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that behind the labels And the headlines and the political battles, there are real people with real stories to tell.
Speaking of those stories, I think it's worth mentioning that Bookgist.net has a whole library of summaries on books about, politics, history, social issues, if you're interested in exploring these themes further, or just want to expand your understanding of the world around us. It's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, great point. Bookgist.net is like this portal to this whole world of knowledge and insight, no matter what you're interested in. And remember, you can find the full summary of Melania there, which will give you all those rich details we didn't have time to cover in our deep dive.
Yeah, it's a perfect way to get the full picture and really delve into the parts of the book that resonate the most with you. Now, as we wrap up our exploration of Melania, I want to leave you with something to ponder.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Melania's story really makes me think about the expectations we place on public figures, especially women in positions of power. They're often judged more harshly, scrutinized more intensely, held to these different standards than their male counterparts.
That's so true. We see it time and time again, whether it's in politics or entertainment, or even in the business world. It makes you wonder how much of what we perceive about a public figure is shaped by, our own biases and these preconceived notions.
Exactly. So as you reflect on Melania's journey, I encourage you to consider this. How do our own biases shape the way we view and judge public figures, particularly women? And how can we move towards a more empathetic and understanding approach?
Wow, that's a powerful question to leave our listeners with. It really challenges us to examine our own assumptions and strive for this more nuanced and fair perspective. It's a conversation we all need to be having.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, there you have it, folks, our deep dive to Melania by Melania Trump. Remember to check out Bookgist.net for the full summary and a wealth of other fascinating book insights. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep learning, and keep those minds open.